This is Amanda.
Hello, you're listening to Democracy Watch on CITR 101.9 FM. We are broadcasting from UBC's Point Grey campus, and we are bringing you alternative and undercovered current affairs from Vancouver and the Lower Mainland. My name is Alex DeBoer.
I'm Andy Laidman.
And I'm Adeline Payne.
It's Thursday, August 2nd at 5:02 p.m. As Alex mentioned, we're broadcasting from the Point Grey campus on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territories of the Hunkaminam-speaking Musqueam people. Today's show will be bringing you parts 2 and 3 of 2 specially reported series.
We have part 2 of our series, It's Not Weed, It's Not Pot, It's the Cannabis Industry, produced by myself, Adeline Payne, and News Collective member Zubin Shroff Marabadi. This segment focuses on whether there will be a shortage of supply in the initial days of marijuana legalization, whether a black market will remain, how approaches to marijuana legalization will be similar to alcohol regulation, and cross-border regulations regarding cannabis.
But first, we have part 3 of our series, Warning, Backpage Not Found, created by myself, Andy Laidman, and News Collective member Sammy Smart. This series is about SESTAFOSTA, the American bills that made websites responsible if third parties were found to be posting illegal ads for prostitution. The bills have had far-reaching implications for sex workers, including those here in Vancouver and in the Lower Mainland. The piece will feature local sex worker and trans rights activist Haley Hartless, who tells us her story and the real-world impact the bills have had on her. Let's take a listen. Andy Laidman, and you're listening to Warning, Backpage Not Found.
On April 11, 2018, the United States passed the Stop Enabling Sex Traffickers Act and Allow States to Fight Online Sex Trafficking Act into law. The two bills, grouped together and referred to as SESTAFOSTA, are framed as a way to prevent online sex trafficking, but in reality are causing many problems for sex workers in the United States and internationally, as US-based websites like Backpage were seized under the new law. My name is Sammy Smart, and together with Andy Laidman, we conducted a series of interviews investigating the real-world effect of the legislation on Vancouver sex workers.
I spoke to Haley Hartless, a local trans sex worker and activist, to get her take on the repercussions following the passage of FOSTA SESTA. Haley opened by telling me about her experience using LeoList, a Vancouver-based advertising website which Carmen, who you heard from in the last segment, also uses. Haley's experience using the site was a bit different as a trans woman.
So LeoList was an advertising site here in Vancouver that was semi-popular. I've been using it for a while. And when Backpage shut down, there was a big push locally to get people to move over to LeoList. A lot of people hadn't heard of LeoList. The thing is, they've become really heavily saturated. So if you post an ad on LeoList, it'll move off the front page pretty quickly, like in a few hours, I've heard, for cisgender women. It's not as bad in the trans and BDSM sections. I can usually post an ad and just bump it once a day. When Backpage got shut down, I think it scared away a lot of clients because they didn't want to set up with a new website. That even though you don't need an account on LeoList to reply to ads, I think a lot of them were just a little bit nervous about switching to a new site. It's been slow going, but I've started to get people responding. I don't know if I'll ever get the same business from LeoList as I got from Backpage. Backpage had a huge presence. Like, everybody knew about Backpage. There's a few other alternative sites, some that are being started by sex workers. They're just not very popular. There's sex work that happens on Facebook. It's a little bit different. A lot of sex workers on Facebook are there promoting themselves as a brand. They might be on there as their sex worker persona, and they might have a Facebook account where they talk about themselves in character all the time. People that are doing like escorting, most people want to keep it away from their Facebook. There's support groups on Facebook for sex workers as well, where people can network and share safety information. Facebook could be held liable, even if they have groups that are about sharing safety information or safe calls, where sex workers are saying, this is the license plate, this is what the person looks like, this is what the car looks like, and I'll check back in 3 hours. Websites like that are potentially being censored by laws like FOSTA and SESTA. There's a ton of sex workers on Twitter. Sex workers are afraid that they might lose Twitter. For people like me that engage in activism, we're on Twitter's radar a lot because a lot of the stuff we engage in upsets people, and they report us. Have my account suspended because of mass reporting. And there's another social media that people call Switter, And it's based on a technology called Mastodon, which is a Twitter clone. It's an open source project, and you can get the software and you set up your own server and you connect it to this Mastodon network. And so a group of sex workers created their own Mastodon server and set up a social media network called Twitter just for sex workers and clients. The idea of Twitter, at least you know that you're not going to be shut down. I know that when it went live onto Mastodon, it really upset a lot of people because the entire network was mostly populated by like programmers.
Haley told me about the forms of blacklist and screening websites that are used by sex workers to assist with safety concerns and share bad date reports with each other.
Some of the screening websites stopped accepting new members. They changed the way their forums look and work. I know one really popular screening website. They went in and they edited a bunch of their blacklists where before it would say, client didn't pay, client assaulted me. And they would take that out because they didn't want a reference to sex work. So they took that away and just put in flaky. Yeah, there's some bad date lists still around. A lot of the big centralized ones have been really disrupted. And a lot of the forums as well.
The big question that Sammy and I sought to understand through this project is who is affected and why. I asked Haley for her take.
The people that are most affected seem to be the people that are on the verge of street-level sex work. People think that there's distinction between street-level sex workers and indoor sex workers when there's a lot of crossover, and there's a lot of women who will do street-level sex work if they need quick money. They also do indoor sex work as well.
One alternative to private advertising is working through a brothel or escort agency. I asked Haley about this option for members of the trans sex work community.
Trans sex workers is like a really sort of specific niche. I don't know of an agency here in Vancouver that hires any. They seem to really focus on advertising a very specific type. And if you don't fit that exact specific type, they can't really do anything for you. And they don't know how to advertise plus-size women or women of color. It's not what they do. They have ads that have all these women that fit their brand image, and that's who they market.
So what is it that people need to know about the real-world impacts of SESTAFOSTA?
I think people need to know that when you pass these laws without consulting sex workers and without consulting trafficking survivors as well, you create this situation where people who are victims of trafficking or exploitation are just going to be forced onto the street. The other thing too is like we still need to work. What happened after Backpage was shut down was a lot of pimps started texting sex workers and guaranteeing people work. What ends up happening is you create this law to try and stop trafficking, and you end up pushing consensual sex workers into the arms of human traffickers. And I think the thing is, trafficking is an important issue to tackle, but you're never going to tackle human trafficking if you don't also tackle the workplace issues involved in consensual sex work. To be fighting for sex worker rights, you have to be fighting for better conditions for sex workers and conditions where sex workers are able to organize and talk with police, promote safety in our community, and let us help with that anti-trafficking work. I think here in Canada they need to revoke the asymmetric criminalization laws that they have, because you're allowed to sell sex, but you're not allowed to buy it. And you're not allowed to run a brothel. But it goes further than that, because you're also not allowed to work with other people for safety. You're not allowed to work out of your own home unless your home meets really specific criteria. The intent is to try and demand, but you're not going to end demand. Clients don't want to talk about what their limits are, what their expectations are, because they're terrified. They'll tell you something in an email, and then they'll show up expecting something different because they don't want to write what they want because they're afraid that'll be used against them. So you can't communicate with clients in public spaces. You have to go out away from the public, away from the earshot of people, and have a discussion there. And it just makes it way more dangerous. If we can't negotiate boundaries, then we can't do this work safely. VPD seems to have a pretty decent enforcement policy. Different police departments in the Lower Mainland can act kind of differently. Some police departments engage with things like Operation Northern Spotlight, which is a US-based anti-trafficking initiative that's done across Canada and the States simultaneously. They kind of like raid massage parlors And if they find illegal immigrants, there's a chance that they'll send them back home. They conduct stings where they set up a date out of this space, and it's police. They're asking you if you need to be saved, and they're doing like these scared straight tactics to get you out of work, and now you don't have rent money. And things like Operation Northern Spotlight don't actually seem to result in people actually leaving the industry. It's just a big inconvenience for people. And some police departments in the Lower Mainland have said that they won't be doing that anymore. Here in Canada, I'd like to see like the New Zealand model, decriminalization, which is different from legalization. Legalization sets up a legal framework where licenses are issued and people have to go through red tape, and they might have to get tested, and whether or not they can work depends on all sorts of different factors. And that sounds good, but what it ends up doing is it creates gates where people who can afford to get these licenses buy them, and then they decide who gets to work. Migrant sex workers end up working illegally and for less money, and people like trans women or niche providers end up working illegally because there's only so many licenses that go around, and they want to give them out to their marketable women. They don't want to give them out to plus-size women or a woman of color who might not be able to bring in the business for the people who own the license. Decriminalization basically makes it so that the industry can regulate itself. It takes away a lot of the red tape. It takes away a lot of the rules, and you can still have laws in place against exploitation and trafficking, but it takes away the rules against working together or communicating our boundaries or advertising, and sort of puts it on us to decide how we want to organize and how we want to regulate.
And that was the final installment of Warning Backpage Not Found. Sammy Smart and I would like to thank Haley for taking the time to speak with us about her experiences following FOSTA SESTA and the closure of Backpages.com. We'd also like to thank you for tuning in to CITR. Stay tuned for more local news coming up.
People are really done with politics as usual.
But then it's all about the competition.
Every Vancouverite has their own story.
The perfect time for our alternative.
Vancouver's municipal election looms, October 20th. Do you know who's running for
City Council, School Board, Parks Board?
This is a wacky municipal election, and you're going to want to stay updated. Download Seeking Office, the newest municipal elections podcast from CITR's News Collective. Find Seeking Office on iTunes and Stitcher, or wherever you download your podcasts, starting July 3rd.
You know what's better than reading a great magazine? Reading a great magazine that also helps you fight poverty. Megaphone magazine is sold by homeless and low-income vendors on the streets of Vancouver and Victoria. Vendors buy magazines for 75 cents and sell them for $2. It's flexible, low-barrier work for people who may not have access to traditional jobs. Download the Megaphone app to find vendors and buy the magazine, even when you don't have change.
And we're back. I'm Adeline Ping, and this is Democracy Watch on CITR 101.9 FM. You just heard part 3 of our series, Warning Backpage Not Found, by Andy Laidman and Sammy Smart. We're now going to turn to a story I've been working on with Zubin Shroff Marabity. Take a listen.
For kids to buy marijuana. In many cases, it's easier to buy marijuana as a young person than it is to buy beer. Think about it. There's no black market for beer.
You just heard Justin Trudeau speaking at a town hall event in Sackville, Nova Scotia earlier this year. In our last part, we introduced the topic and our 4 guests on what they would like the public to know about legalization, how much additional growth is expected in the burgeoning cannabis industry, and their views on the upcoming regulations. This is part 2 of It's Not Weed, It's Not Pot, It's the Cannabis Industry. Prime Minister Trudeau sees the removal of the black market as a key goal of legalizing cannabis. But will that happen? Here's what Michael Hoffweiler thinks.
I mean, at the end of the day, the black market's still going to be here for a long time, and the reason being, regulations are so stringent on legal, or regulations are so, let's say, it's hard for a cultivator to become a licensed cultivator in Canada that you're going to see a shortage of legal cannabis. And so that coupled with the fact that you can now grow cannabis at home, I'm going to grow some interesting strains, all my friends will, we're going to trade it up, we're still going to do all that sort of stuff. But at the same time, if dispensaries run out of cannabis, where are you going to get it from? Well, there's still tons of growers around, and there's still going to be supply available.
So on that note, would you then commend the city of Vancouver for taking a much more laissez-faire approach to it?
Hell yes, I would. Frankly, I really don't think that any industry should be heavily regulated, whether it's cannabis, whether it's alcohol and tobacco. I think a free market should occur, and especially with cannabis. So kudos to Vancouver for keeping the split model here. Now, I understand the BCLC wants to make their cut and all that sort of thing, and every dispensary or every licensed producer that wants to buy cannabis from another dispensary or producer has to go through a government sort of check and balance, or a government purchaser. So,
right, they're going through, if I understand, the liquor distribution board is going to take over the supply of cannabis.
Yeah, so they're going to regulate the supply of cannabis. They'll take over the buying and the selling of it, and really, I think that boils down to them just getting their cut at the end of the day, because I think that I think software people or young entrepreneurs are smart enough to be able to create a supply chain that's pretty airtight these days. But I definitely think that the government sees the opportunity for a lot of revenue, and I just think they want to do it right, at least initially. So what they've done is they've taken tobacco laws and alcohol laws and slapped them together and been like, this is your first kind of cannabis regulations. But over time, you're going to start to see things relax a bit more. And I guess that's what we're looking towards as the industry matures a bit.
Next, we will feature Alex Robb from Trees Dispensary on Vancouver Island. Even with BC's current supply structure, he believes there can be a way for micro-cultivators that are currently operating on the black market to enter the legal marketplace. According to Alex, the liquor distribution branch, now called the Liquor and Cannabis Licensing Board, will be in charge of the supply.
They'll be supplying to all retailers, so I guess every dispensary has to purchase their cannabis through that government agency. Do you think that there will be a shortage of supply in this type of system?
I believe that as it's currently structured, yes, there will be, but there is sufficient supply in BC. So that's the interesting thing, is that if the provincial government and the federal government can process applications in a timely enough fashion such that micro cultivators can get in, they need not be on the black market. There is a way that they can come to the legal market and then work through groups like what we're trying to set up to sell to the legal marketplace. So I really do hope that the BC province is not only focused on making sure that they have as much supply as possible, but making sure that they can have a continuation of supply from the existing industry. So I think that if they're too slow in terms of their processing of new applications and allowing people who already have grows underway that are in the illicit market to be inspected and certified and provide quality assurance so that they can supply to it, then there need not be a long-term supply issue. But I think on day one, there might be a supply issue. There's another side to this too, which is that the supply issue may not be as much of a problem as people anticipate if the BC government gives itself its own kind of grace period for transition into a legal marketplace. And so what I mean by that is that just because we've legalized and there's now licensed private stores and licensed public stores, that's not going to mean immediately that all the existing black market dispensaries would close down or be closed down. The government may allow them to continue to operate for some time before beginning significant enforcement measures. And I think that it's in their interest in terms of not being seen as the bad guy like making sure that there is sufficient capacity in the legal marketplace to provide for these for the demand, and then down the line, people who were not acting in good faith, not making applications for licenses, or were outside of the bounds of what the municipalities in their area wanted to see, like they could be closed down by this provincial unit that they're going to start up later on. But that might not be for another year, right? Or 2 years kind of thing. I think the province has an interest in maintaining access to cannabis for people, and sometimes that might mean accepting that there's going to be a continuation of the black market, but taking sort of gradual and constant efforts to change, to privilege or to reward people in the licit system, and then eventually also having enforcement on people who are operating outside of that system.
Echoing these sentiments, Glenn Korstrom from Business in Vancouver confirms these supply concerns.
Yeah, it seems that consensus in the industry is that at the beginning, at least, there will be a severe shortage. The CIBC put out a study a few months ago saying that, and actually Business in Vancouver hosted a panel and an event last week at the Vancouver Club, and the CEO of Emerald Health said exactly the same thing, that at the very beginning he's 100% sure that there will be a shortage.
At the beginning of this segment, Prime Minister Trudeau implied that one of the major goals of legalization is to regulate cannabis in the same way as alcohol. For this reason, we asked Glenn if he has seen major differences in the approaches taken by provincial, federal, and municipal governments to those two industries.
The government is saying that they're trying to treat it much the same as treat cannabis much the same as alcohol, and they are doing that in as far as things like the minimum age. But there are some distinctive things when it comes to even something like selling snacks. Like if you're a private liquor store, you can sell chocolate bars and bags of chips, but strangely for cannabis, you're not allowed to. So, this wouldn't be THC-laced snacks, but just basic snacks, and you'd think that would be something that the private cannabis store owners would want to sell. I saw something the other day about how in Alberta they're more strict on people underage not being able to go into a cannabis store, which is unlike alcohol. You could go in with your parents. So that the implication of that would be that perhaps kids will be like outside stores waiting for their parents afterwards, which is an interesting thing.
With cannabis becoming legal on October 17th and the Vancouver municipal elections happening on October 20th, we wondered how a new city council will impact the introduction of new cannabis businesses in Vancouver. Now Glenn provides insight into how the city can determine dispensary locations, as well as licensing for existing dispensaries currently operating on the black market.
I think there's a lot of different issues that the city has to determine, and there's a lot of dispensaries operating illegally now. They're all illegal. Some of them have got licenses, but only a fraction of those that are operating have city issued licenses. So the big thing would be whether to exclude all dispensaries from getting what would be legal licenses for the first time if they didn't already get one of these city-issued licenses while it was all illegal. So much of it will go down to things like that, and zoning, where stores can be, how far they can be from each other or from a school or from other things. The city has a lot of say in also, in Vancouver, I don't think there's much, if any, agricultural land, but the province is allowing cities to ban cannabis operations on ALR land within their jurisdiction. And just last night, the city of West Vancouver ruled that they wouldn't allow dispensaries. So that's I mean, big picture, that's something that could happen in Vancouver. To say that they don't want to allow any dispensaries, I just can't imagine that a future city council would say that they won't allow any dispensaries.
The implementation would be interesting.
Yeah. But for other cities where there are no current illegal dispensaries, they are given the leeway to essentially ban them, and then the province's e-commerce system that will be run by Shopify will be the way to buy cannabis in those communities, unless people drive to another one.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be interesting to see in a city like New Westminster how many dispensaries will then pop up on the outskirts of that municipal district.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, if a community like New West were to say that dispensaries and actually we can't call them dispensaries post legalization. Oh, okay. The province won't allow any cannabis store to call themselves a dispensary after like the legal ones, and that's because dispensary has a connotation of being a healthy substance, or like a pharmacy. But you're right. I mean, as far as the real estate right outside New West could be a good location.
Finally, there is the significant issue of crossing the U.S.-Canada border if you've ever smoked cannabis or are involved in the cannabis industry. According to U.S. federal law, admitting to being involved in either of those activities will constitute as being involved in or profiting from the drug trade. This will entail a lifetime ban from entering the U.S., and waivers will be required for access thereafter. We spoke with Glenn about the implications of these regulations for Canadian travelers as well as business people who are partnering with U.S. businesses in the cannabis industry.
I think there could be a lot more, or there should be a lot more attention on the fact that the U.S. government is handing out lifetime bans to visit the U.S. If you admit that you've ever smoked or consumed cannabis, or if you've ever invested in a company that has U.S. cannabis operations, and there's many of those companies on the Canadian Stock Exchange, and executives. I've heard of at least a dozen in the last few months. Executives getting these lifetime bans.
And so, do you see that? I mean, that definitely would sound like a major cause for concern for wealthy investors who probably do a lot of business between the two countries.
Yeah. I mean, it could theoretically just, I'm not sure how wealthy you'd have to be. I mean, there's, like I say, on the Canadian Stock Exchange, there's many companies like Friday Night Inc. or Canix Capital. Planet 13 just went public there in June, I think it was. But a lot of these companies are, if you Google CSE and something like Nevada, you'll come up with examples of companies that have operations there. And lawyers say that any professional who does work for them and are based in Canada, the U.S. government could deem to be living off the avails of the drug trade, and therefore be inadmissible forever in the U.S. And then you have to go through a waiver process, which costs $585 U.S. before legal fees, which could be a couple $1,000, and that would just be to perhaps get a waiver for 5 years, and then you have to keep renewing it for the rest of your life. So it's a serious thing, and there are people like Mobina Jaffer, who's a senator here, gave a real impassioned speech on the issue in the Senate in June about how there hasn't been a government education campaign to really get the word out of that if you're investing in a company that has operations in the U.S. cannabis business, either don't try to cross the border or divest that investment. At this point, it sounds like CBSA. I mean, they've got some videos, like online videos, but they just, the ones I've seen focus on not bringing cannabis across the border, which I think, it might seem obvious, but certainly don't do that. But it's not just not taking it across the border. It's if you've ever smoked cannabis, to admit to that. And also the lawyers say, tell the truth, or at least don't lie. Perhaps the best strategy if you have smoked cannabis and you're asked is to just remain silent. And you may not get into the U.S. on that occasion because you're not cooperating with them. But they won't give you a lifetime ban for not answering the question. But if you answer the question honestly, you'd be given a lifetime ban.
This was part 2 of It's Not Weed, It's Not Pot, It's the Cannabis Industry. Stay tuned for part 3 coming soon. The segment you just heard was produced by Zubin Shroff-Marabity and Adeline Pang. The Justin Trudeau opening clip was courtesy of McLean's YouTube channel. And as always, many thanks to Alex DeBoer, our informative interviewees, and everyone who made this episode possible.
We're kicking off Pride at UBC in style with a free daytime event. On August 1st, sashay your way to the U Commons area outside the Nest from 4 p.m. onwards to celebrate diversity, inclusion, and positive space at UBC. There will be a public disco with feel-good disco and house anthems, craft beer, and a drag and dress-up trunk. There will also be live mural painting with a selection of food trucks on site with special Pride-themed menus. Come to UBC Pride on August 1st.
And we're back. This is Democracy Watch on CITR 101.9 FM. You just heard part 2 of our series, It's Not Weed, It's Not Pot, It's the Cannabis Industry. So we're keeping you up to date on our soon-to-be legal marijuana situation in Canada. So that piece was by Adeline Pang and Zubin Shroff-Marabity. We're now going to hear a little piece that we did last week because it's so good and so important. It's about sharks on our coasts in honor of Shark Week, which was last week, which is a programming special Discovery Channel does. So listen to this little piece. It's informative and it's fun. So here we go.
Daily Hive reported that a local woman sighted a shark fin during her morning walk on Kitsilano Beach near Bayswater Street. Surprised by the sighting, she quickly snapped a photo of the shark and shared it on social media. The aquarium confirmed that the shark most likely was an adult Pacific spiny dogfish shark.
Dogfish? Mate, you call that a shark? Come on, surely BC has some bigger sharks than that out here.
Yeah, so in Canada we have 27 species of sharks, and a lot of people don't realize that we have that many. But on the Pacific coast we have 14, and there are about 7, so about half of those 14 are very common. So that includes spiny dogfish. So if you've ever gone fishing for salmon, people often catch spiny dogfish instead because they eat similar things to salmon and they live in similar places. And so those are small sharks that usually get to about a meter long. And also thresher sharks, which are really cool. Everybody loves thresher sharks. They have the really long top part of their tails. So they whip those to stun groups of fish and eat them. And also some deep water sharks, some really cool ones. We have six-gill sharks that are like big ancient sharks that move quite slowly and live in really cold, deep waters. Also the blue shark that's now been featured on our stamps. There are 5 new postal stamps that are featuring Canadian sharks, and one of them is the blue shark. So yeah, we have quite a few species. Pretty cool.
That was Madeline Cashin, a fisheries conservation and policy scientist who recently graduated from UBC specializing in ecology and shark and ray research.
This Sheila knows a lot about sharks. For a Canadian.
And, we asked her about what type of sharks we should be afraid of, and this was her answer.
No. The fact is that you're really not going to run into these sharks probably ever if you live in BC. The only way that you would maybe is if you were on a fishing vessel or maybe far out on a boat. But otherwise, you're probably not going to see them. And if you do see them, it's such a rare occurrence. I mean, there are some crazy statistics about, like, more people are bitten in New York City by people a year than sharks worldwide bite humans. So, yeah. And, like, I could keep going. Like, vending machines kill more people than sharks. It's about the frequency, right? If you don't see them, you're not going to have a problem with them. And just like if you were wandering, like, the African savanna by yourself, you'd be wary of running into maybe some big cats, like lions. And that's something you've got to keep in mind. More in tropical areas of the world, but even on our coast, I mean, it's always good to just know, to be wary of where you are. But I would say, like, other hazards like drowning are a much bigger issue for us.
Mate, I am not going to New York City anytime soon. Tell you that for free. Right, and you know what else Mad Dog Matto knows about sharks?
Okay, I tell everybody this one, but my favorite shark fact is that sharks have been on the earth longer than trees. So they evolved before trees did, which is just unreal to think about. And also, because they've been on this earth so long, they've really had a chance to evolve and kind of like penetrate all parts of the ocean and rivers and lakes as well in some cases. So there are just a lot of species.
Whoa, that's actually kind of frightening that they're going into lakes and rivers.
Mate, you reckon that's frightening? What about global warming?
So it's definitely true that we're going to start seeing different kinds of shark species, and we've already seen a couple different species that we're not used to seeing, or a higher frequency of the warm water sharks that don't visit us very often. So, and that includes great white sharks. I know everybody wants to hear about great white sharks, and on both coasts of Canada. Sorry, there are 3 coasts, but on the Pacific and the Atlantic coast, we definitely are seeing a higher abundance of white sharks coming in seasonally.
Crikey!
We asked Madeline how we should be celebrating Shark Week, and this was her answer.
Well, I don't really watch Shark Week, unfortunately. I feel a little bit of guilt about it, but I'm just not interested in a lot of the shows that are on there. The good news is that a lot of those shows are starting to be more based on fact and featuring actual researchers, which is exciting. But I would just say pick the shows carefully and do something to help the oceans. There's a lot of great causes you can donate money or time to, especially if you live on the coast. I mean, find out if there's a shoreline cleanup. Maybe donate to a local NGO. Spend some time with them, because that's really what they need is time and always money, obviously. So, and that's the best way to help sharks, is just to get involved.
Yeah, mate, that's the spirit. Help the cute little nippers out.
Happy Shark Week.
Happy Shark Week. Happy Shark Week. Shark Week.
Without the help and support of our friends, we here at CITR wouldn't be able to bring you all the great music, art, cinema, and culture that you love. Thanks to the long-standing support from the Rio Theatre, we are able to keep you informed on all the great artists, films, and everything else coming to town there. For all the current information about who and what's playing at the Rio Theatre, visit their website at www.riotheatre.ca.
Hey, what's wrong?
I've been looking for a job since I came to Canada, and I haven't found anything.
Have you tried WorkLearn?
What's WorkLearn?
Part-time jobs on campus for international undergraduate students just like us. Help me find a great job that's actually related to my studies.
Wow, I'll have to check that out.
You should. It's good pay, good experience, and good for your career. Just look for WorkLearn postings at www.careersonline.ubc.ca. You can even ask your profs and campus staff if they can create a job for you.
To participate in WorkLearn, you must be an international student seeking an undergraduate degree in a participating faculty and registered full-time, with a study permit valid for at least 6 months. For more information, visit www.careers.ubc.ca.
Hello, and you are listening to Democracy Watch on CITR 101.9 FM. I hope you enjoyed that little shark piece. Not traditional journalism, some might say, but hey.
It's community radio.
This is community radio, and this is why you love us. I loved that piece. That's why we played it again.
So cute.
And also because we didn't have enough content. But you know why we didn't have enough content? Because we have a podcast also. So it's a lot of work going into that. If you don't know from our shameless plugging and the ad we played during the show, our podcast is called Seeking Office. And you can download that wherever you get your podcasts. So iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, whatever. We have 4 episodes on there, and we're working on 2 more, and we're really excited about them. Our last episode was part of a series called How We Got Here, which is providing context to Vancouver and Vancouver government, because we think here at the News Collective it's really important that people understand how we got to where we are and what the foundation is for our current democracy and electoral system and such. So we're focusing on that. Part 2 is going to be coming out soon. We also have a piece on Yes Vancouver coming out. Myself and Zubin Shroff-Marabadi spent part of last Saturday at the Yes Vancouver candidate selection meeting, which was at the Polish Hall on Fraser and about 25th. So that was really interesting to see and to hear a bit more from Hector Bremner, who started the party and is running for mayor. He's a former MPA member. He's a current sitting MPA city councillor. So we'll be getting into a bit of the nitty gritty there and how that all took place. So there's lots of exciting content coming up. In the meantime, we're going to leave you guys a bit early today because we're going to keep working on stuff for Seeking Office. We appreciate you listening to us. And if you don't already, feel free to follow us on Twitter at CITR News and on Facebook as well, the same handle. And enjoy the long weekend, because that is this weekend. I'm Alex DeBoer.
I'm Andy Laidman.
And I'm Adeline Payne. Stay tuned for next week and hope you have exciting adventures this weekend.
Yes.